You know, every now and then a story comes along in politics that has all the classic elements of a great drama. You've got ambition, you've got loyalty, and of course, a very, very public betrayal. Today, we're going to break down the case of Raghav Chadha and really look at the anatomy of a modern political defection. It's a pretty cynical take, isn't it? But after years of covering this world, I can tell you it's often proven true. Yesterday's firebrand revolutionary, well, they become today's establishment figure. The person who is the fiercest critic of a party suddenly becomes its newest shiny prize. And that brings us right to our central character. I mean, it really wasn't that long ago that Raghav Chadha was the guy on the left. Polished, articulate, the face of a new kind of politics. He was supposed to be the future of his party. But today, to his old allies, he's the man on the right. A defector, an opportunist, the guy who blew a hole in their party. So the real question is, how does a political image shatter so completely? And then, bam, the whole thing kicked off with a political earthquake. See, this wasn't some quiet resignation. Chadha didn't just walk out the door. He took a huge chunk of his party's power in the upper house with him. This move completely changed the math in Parliament. It was obviously planned, well executed, and designed for maximum damage. Okay, so to really get why this was such a big deal, you have to understand the investment the party had in him. We need to look at why him leaving wasn't just a loss. It was a devastating blow to the very idea of what the Aam Aadmi Party was supposed to be. I mean, look at this profile. Chadha ticked all the boxes for modern political brand. He was basically everything his party wanted to project to the world. Young, super educated, a great speaker, and he really connected with that urban middle-class voter. He was, for all intents and purposes, the party's future walking around in a person. And believe me, the party used him for everything. Need someone to go win a tough TV debate? Send Raghav. A press conference on some complicated economic policy? Get Raghav. He wasn't just another MP. He was seen as the insider, the strategist, Arvind Kejriwal's most trusted guy. His influence was absolutely huge. But here's the truth about politics. When someone shoots up that fast, people don't always cheer. They start doing the math. Inside any party, that kind of meteoric rise creates friction. So while the public was seeing a rising star, some of the old guard inside the party were reportedly seeing a threat. And that's where you start to see the first cracks. So long before this exploded into the open, there were whispers. A kind of quiet Cold War was brewing. The signs were really subtle, the kind of stuff only hardcore political watchers would notice, but they all pointed to a deep and growing problem inside the party. And here's where you could really start to see the split. While the rest of his party was out there every single day attacking the government aggressively, Chadha's tone, it got softer. He started talking more about civic issues, taxes, things that were safer, less confrontational. Now, was he just maturing as a politician, or was he creating distance on purpose? His party definitely started to wonder why their star attack dog was suddenly sounding more like a quiet policy analyst. And then came the public slap on the wrist. They stripped him of his leadership post, and that sent a message loud and clear. Officially, they called it disciplinary action. But in the world of politics, this was a warning shot. It was a signal that he was out of the inner circle. And from that moment on, you knew the relationship was broken. All right, so the next chapter in this whole saga, it played out online. And let me tell you, when a politician starts erasing their digital past, it is almost never a coincidence. People online, the real digital detectives, started noticing something weird was going on. A massive digital cleanup was happening. Years and years of sharp anti-BJP tweets, posts that made fun of the prime minister, stuff that called the ruling party all sorts of names. They were just being deleted one by one. Poof, gone. His entire digital footprint as an anti-BJP crusader was wiped clean. Now, this wasn't just a shift in tone anymore. This looked like a deliberate plan to erase one political identity to make room for a new one. And the public, well, they knew exactly what this looked like. This phrase, washing machine politics, it started trending everywhere. It's the term people use when a politician joins the ruling party to wash away all their past sins or legal troubles. So the whole narrative shifted. This wasn't about a fight with AAP anymore. It was about him getting ready to join the BJP. So once he jumped ship, two very different stories started to form to explain why. And depending on which version you believe, Raghav Chadha is either a principled hero or a stone-cold opportunist. So let's break it down. On one side, Chadha's camp says he was basically a whistleblower. He was escaping a toxic party that had totally lost its way. But on the other side, his accusers paint a very different picture. A classic opportunist, a guy whose ambition was way bigger than any ideology he ever claimed to have. But maybe the biggest hit against him came from his own past. All his old words came back to bite him. I mean, he built part of his career by going on TV and slamming other leaders for doing the exact same thing he just did. And that, for his critics, made this not just a betrayal, but a masterclass in hypocrisy. And the reaction online, it was exactly what you'd expect. Absolutely brutal and totally split. The labels came flying: careerist, opportunist. For a lot of people, this was just more proof that ideology in politics is just for show. But there was a counterargument too, that AAP did this to themselves by pushing out one of their smartest people, leaving him nowhere else to go. Okay, so let's zoom out. What's the real lesson here? If you peel back all the noise and the Twitter drama, what does this whole episode really tell us about power and loyalty in politics today? The simplest lesson might just be this. In a mess like this, you're not going to find a hero. What you find are competing villains. You've got a politician who's accused of trading his principles for power, and a party that's accused of becoming the very top-down system it was created to fight. Which leaves us with the big question, right? The one that's still kind of hanging in the air. Was he a reformer who was being suppressed and he made a break for it? Or was he a guy who was smiling and nodding in party meetings while secretly negotiating his next big career move? At the end of the day, maybe the Raghav Chadha story is just a brutal reminder of a fundamental truth in politics. Parties talk a big game about ideology, politicians talk about morality. But when the winds of power really start to shift, you find out just how flexible friendships, loyalties, and even principles can be. They can be rewritten almost overnight to fit a brand new reality. What actually happens when the messy, totally unfiltered reality of a political defection crashes headfirst into a highly curated celebrity lifestyle brand? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right in to dissect the public optics behind Raghav Chadha's political pivot. We are strictly examining the visual packaging and the PR psychology used to soften public outrage. It's honestly a masterclass in how modern political images are built, deployed, and ultimately tested under some seriously intense pressure. Here is how we're breaking this down today. 1. The celebrity shield concept. 2. Softening a political image. 3. Crafting a youth icon. 4. The attention diffusion strategy. 5. Weaponizing restraint and silence. And finally, number 6. Did the shield actually work? All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the celebrity shield concept. Traditionally, changing political parties is a really explosive affair. It's the kind of move that almost inevitably leaves a politician branded as a pure opportunist. It's visceral, it shakes up their public capital, and historically, it invites massive, unfiltered public backlash. The gut instinct of a betrayed base is to immediately paint the departing figure in the absolute worst possible light. So, to cushion what loyalists would call a betrayal, a carefully constructed outer shell of celebrity adjacency is often deployed. The whole goal here is to fundamentally reframe the narrative lens. Instead of audiences seeing this ruthless political pivot, the optics are meticulously managed to bathe the move in an aura of pragmatic maturity. Think about how powerful that shift really is. If you can make an audience believe a drastic change is just sophisticated evolution rather than raw ambition, you essentially defang the most vicious critiques before they even land. Which brings us to Section 2, softening a political image. We're going to focus right here on the dramatic shift in public branding following a high-profile marriage to Bollywood actress Parineeti Chopra. Just consider the profound psychological contrast at play. Before the marriage, the persona was largely that of an aggressive party spokesperson. He was known heavily for sharp legal arguments and intense anti-BJP fire. But post-marriage, the visual diet fed to the public completely flipped. The internet was suddenly flooded with images of a polished gentleman, an educated young father delivering highly emotive speeches on family values, and a balanced partner in a relatable elite relationship. Psychologists actually call this the halo effect. Audiences subconsciously stop seeing a harsh political operative and they start seeing a relatable human being. That rough political edge is fundamentally softened by the glow of domestic warmth. Moving on to Section 3, crafting a youth icon. Because, look, this visual transition wasn't accidental and it certainly didn't happen overnight. Before any political switch ever occurred, the marketing had already strategically pivoted away from the image of a traditional cadre leader. It moved squarely toward cultivating an urban, Gen Z demographic online. But that raises a super fascinating question, doesn't it? How exactly does a traditional member of parliament achieve this Bollywood-style crossover fandom? Because, let's be real, you do not capture millions of highly engaged, meme-friendly, English-speaking young followers simply by reading standard legislative speeches. It requires a completely different mechanism of communication. It requires a highly curated playbook. Step 1 is intense social media curation, designing an aesthetic that feels way more like an influencer's grid than a politician's diary. Step 2 involves polished video clipping, taking complex parliamentary debates and distilling them into snappy, highly shareable content. Step 3 uses audience-targeted themes that resonate directly with youth anxieties and aspirations. And the whole thing is topped off in Step 4 with a distinctly non-threatening presentation. If you package a politician this way over several years, an eventual defection is so much easier to sell to younger voters. It's not raw political greed anymore. It's a strategic, modern evolution. Let's look at Section 4, the attention diffusion strategy. This introduces a subtle yet incredibly powerful PR tactic leveraged through a celebrity spouse. Attention diffusion is just a fascinating phenomenon in modern PR. When a politician is linked to a major celebrity, human nature kind of just takes over. We are inherently wired for stories about people, relationships, and drama far more than we are wired for dry political theory. So, relationship gossip naturally dilutes political backlash. By shifting public bandwidth toward emotional, celebrity-driven curiosity, the pure political heat begins to evaporate. Think about how often you see this on your own feeds. When a scandal breaks, how quickly does a targeted lifestyle headline drop to change the conversation? It's a luxury that traditional, unshielded politicians almost never get to enjoy. You can see exactly how the media headlines shifted during the controversy here. Instead of the conversation remaining locked in purely political discourse, with critics shouting things like hungry conspirator or opportunist, the celebrity shield smoothly diffused the narrative. The headlines softened into curious, empathetic questions. Things like, is Parineeti standing by her husband? Or, is the couple under pressure? Public anger, which usually demands immediate political accountability, was seamlessly redirected into a form of lifestyle consumption and parasocial empathy. Now for Section 5, weaponizing restraint and silence. Let's examine how the family man narrative and strict visual discipline created a massive cushion of responsibility. Consider this textbook sequence of reputation cushioning. Months prior to the move, the focus was entirely placed on raising paternity leave, parenting, and middle-class concerns in Parliament. Weeks prior, public praise from a celebrity wife reinforced this exact caring father image in the press. So by the actual day of the defection, the psychological anchor already established in the public's mind wasn't of a scheming manipulator. It was of a civilized family man seemingly forced into a corner by circumstance. Audiences subconsciously hesitate to demonize someone recently framed in such a nurturing context. It makes a victim narrative incredibly easy to sell. And there's another layer to this. Defectors typically become loud, defensive, and visually aggressive when cornered by the media. But here, the communication remained visually restrained. We saw measured, well-lit videos, clean, upscale backgrounds, polished language, and a total absence of screaming press conferences or raw verbal abuse. By consistently matching the aesthetics of a high-culture ecosystem, this restraint was perceived by the audience as dignified. It acted as an aesthetic buffer, entirely preventing the optics of a cheap or chaotic rebellion. Finally, Section 6. Did the shield actually work? What were the absolute limits of this sophisticated political image packaging when the moment of truth finally arrived? 1 million. That is the massive number of followers lost during the immediate backlash. And it proves a vital reality of modern public relations. While the celebrity shield absolutely softened the blow and shifted the media narrative, it couldn't stop the betrayal label entirely. That carefully cultivated Gen Z fandom, the very audience built on lifestyle and progressive aesthetics, still felt profoundly cheated. The sheer volume of online anger and the rapid follower exodus really exposed these stark, quantifiable limits of even the most expensive, well-executed PR shielding. The source material captures this dynamic perfectly. It notes that he didn't defect looking like a traditional political rebel. Instead, he defected wearing the carefully polished image of a soft-spoken, celebrity-backed reformer.
and that image may have been his first shield against public hatred. The polished shell definitely served its purpose. It acted as a vital first line of defense, separating him from the messy optics of ordinary opportunism, even if it couldn't magically block all the digital fallout. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question. When the PR fades and the celebrity shield cracks, does the public ultimately forgive a polished defection? No matter how brilliant the attention diffusion and visual restraint might be, can a carefully crafted image ever truly erase the reality of a political...
Okay, let's dive straight into a really fascinating analysis from our source material today. We're looking at a highly talked about political event, Raghav Chadha's party switch. But we're not looking at this through the lens of your everyday news headlines. Instead, this explainer unpacks a really compelling argument from the source, that this wasn't just some standard political move or an emotional blow-up, but actually a meticulously calculated thriller. The material lays out a whole series of hidden clues suggesting a totally different narrative to what we all saw on the surface.
So, the massive question the source asks us to consider right out of the gate is this. Was this just a sudden, emotional fallout where a politician simply had enough and stormed off? Or what if he was silently preparing a carefully pre-planned political escape route long before the country even noticed? It totally shifts how you look at the situation, right? It asks us to look past all the daily drama and really focus on the nuts and bolts of modern political strategy. So, let's look at the clues the analysis has uncovered.
Let's get right into clue 1. Erasing the digital past and the systematic social media cleansing.
Usually, when an ordinary, angry politician rebels, it is messy. You know the drill. They fire off these highly emotional tweets, give heated interviews, and just directly attack their own party. But Raghav Chadha's approach, the source describes it as much, much colder. Before the official merger even became public knowledge, huge chunks of his old anti-BJP and anti-Modi posts just vanished from X. Multiple users were actually tracking dozens, even hundreds of older political posts disappearing from Instagram in rapid batches. It's kind of like scrubbing your resume in social media right before a massive job hunt. And the source makes a really profound point here. Deletion is not rebellion. Deletion is preparation. By methodically sanitizing his history, he wasn't acting on impulse. He was anticipating a new audience and making absolutely sure the cameras wouldn't find any contradictory statements.
Moving on to clue 2, controlling the outrage, focusing on the absence of an immediate anti-party war.
When a politician feels betrayed, the standard playbook is to basically explode. You expect instant press conferences, wild corruption allegations, personal attacks, maybe even leaked audio, right? But the text notes he stayed remarkably calm. For days after being stripped of his party responsibilities, he didn't burn every bridge in sight. Instead, his rhetoric focused super softly on internal discomfort, toxic work culture, and general governance. His first detailed defense video was framed as this highly rational explanation, not a revenge blast. Why does that matter? Because a person planning to enter another major political party simply cannot afford reckless language. He was acting out pure reputation management, ensuring he looked statesmanlike, calm, and totally mature for his future political home.
Which brings us to clue 3, the synchronized parliament move and the operational mathematics behind the jump.
7. That number is absolutely crucial. It's the operational mathematics of this move and the number of sitting Rajya Sabha MPs who formally merged parties at the exact same time. The analysis calls this the biggest signal that most people completely ignore. Look, if one person resigns, sure, you can chalk it up to a personal fallout, but 7 sitting MPs filing merger papers together, that requires a completely different level of scrutiny.
Like our source breaks down, you simply cannot execute a synchronized parliamentary move of this scale overnight. I mean, think about it. Can 7 sitting MPs independently wake up one morning and make the exact same career-altering decision? No way. It's practically impossible. We can barely get 7 friends to agree on a dinner spot overnight, let alone execute a synchronized parliamentary merger. This breakdown shows what a move like this actually requires. Prior meetings, incredibly complex legal consultations to navigate anti-defection laws, and rock-solid assurances from the receiving party that the merger will actually be recognized. This tells us someone was coordinating this block, either internally or through an external channel, and that means this transition was likely in motion for weeks before the public caught even a whisper of it.
Okay, on to clue 4, repositioning the public image and shifting away from the party's original DNA.
This is where it gets super clever. Notice the subtle change in the final phase of his speeches. The old formula for his party was classic agitation, anti-system anger, heavy corruption rhetoric, basically acting as a fierce ideological soldier. But suddenly, his new formula became highly specific and decidedly neutral. Airport pricing, toll fees, student issues, mobile recharge costs. He went from being an ideological warrior to the guy trying to lower your phone bill. He transformed his entire media personality from a fierce attacker into a practical, everyday solver of small urban citizen inconveniences.
It's literally what observers call textbook political repositioning. Think about it. If you're an aggressive, anti-establishment firebrand, you can't suddenly join the opposing establishment without facing massive public backlash. You'd look like a huge hypocrite. But if you spend weeks rebranding yourself as a practical youth problem solver, your profile suddenly becomes universally transferable. You can walk right into a new party and say, hey, I'm above party lines. I just want good governance. The analysis argues that this image migration began well before his actual party migration.
All right, clue 5, the victimhood groundwork, selling compulsion over ambition.
In the political world, victimhood is basically moral armor. Before the merger was even final, the public conversation had already subtly shifted to paint him as this sidelined, silenced, and misunderstood leader who was being insulted internally. So when the switch finally happened, his defense wasn't, hey, I really wanted to join this new party to further my career ambitions. His defense was, I only had a few roads left because my old environment became toxic. By making sure the public conversation framed him this way early on, he created a scenario where observers would think he simply had no other choice. It's an absolutely masterful way to avoid looking opportunistic. You sell compulsion, not ambition. But that only works if the sympathy groundwork is laid well in advance.
And lastly, clue 6, the smoke before the fire, when the public predicts the switch.
When you actually lay out the anatomy of this staged exit on a timeline, exactly like the source material does, the pattern is just undeniable. Weeks prior, Reddit and online political circles were already buzzing. Common political watchers were pointing out the timeline cleanup, the softer criticism, the polished, neutral branding. They sensed the transition coming because the behavioral changes were just so consistent. Then days prior, the victim narrative takes hold, providing that moral cover we talked about. And finally, the synchronized detonation where 7 MPs defect together. The smoke was already billowing online long before the official fire was ever declared.
So, wrapping up this explainer, we're left with the ultimate thriller question posed by our source to ponder. When you put all these clues together, the archive cleanup, the strict tone discipline, the block coordination, the image rebranding, and the victim narrative, does this resemble one angry, spontaneous resignation? Or, in modern politics, are we simply watching the final step of a flawlessly executed blueprint? What if he was silently redesigning his image, gathering allies, and preparing an escape route long before the country even noticed? It's a perspective that definitely gives you a whole new way to look at the daily political headlines. Think about it. And thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.